It's such an important question as we study about our church's history and our church's doctrine to really get into what do we mean by doctrine and how do we approach church history. Those are the goals that I want to accomplish in this video as we talk together for this time. I've heard a lot of different questions about church doctrine over the years, and some general questions I hear are things like this. If God is unchanging and truth is eternal, then why have some of the church's own teachings changed over time? Or maybe about doctrine, you yourself, or you've heard questions like this, like why don't we still teach this or emphasize this like the early church used to teach? Were they wrong, or are we wrong since that emphasis has gone away? Or this is one of my personal favorites. I once heard that blank general authority, fill in the name, said that, fill in the blank. So is that like church doctrine? And sometimes people will do that. They'll hear a general authority or a church leader say something, and they'll say, well, there's the church's doctrine on that. Sometimes people get confused because they'll find something that a general authority said that contradicts maybe something that a previous or even a current general authority says. How do we handle that when it comes to church doctrine? Without being too facetious or light-minded about it, sometimes people will be like, oh yeah, well, elder so-and-so said this, and somebody who has an opposite position will like, but elder so-and-so said this, and they're like, well, I see your elder so-and-so, and I raise you an elder so-and-so, as though we're trying to pit prophet against prophet, which isn't wise. So how then do we know when something becomes like an official church teaching or something that the church stands by, and when is it just that own particular church leader's opinion or position on the matter? Well, those are just some of the reasons why we need to talk about doctrine. So what I want to do with you, first of all, is define the word doctrine. What do we mean by that word? Because a lot of the debates and discrepancies come over defining the word doctrine. And there's various definitions used. All have their benefits in their own way and in their own time. One common definition that is used in the church today is that doctrine are those things that are eternal and unchanging. I've used that definition. I know church leaders and church curriculum have used that definition. And it's helpful in certain contexts when we're using doctrine. But the problem is that sometimes that definition can also be problematic. It's problematic because then if something is not eternal or has changed, people think it's not doctrine. Or they think that if it doesn't fit within that, they don't need to believe it, or somehow it's not binding. Like, let me give you some examples with that. Based on that criteria of only the eternal, unchanging truths of the gospel being doctrine, well, then based off that, tithing is not church doctrine. I have a hard time with that. I dare you to stand up at the podium and say, tithing is not part of our doctrine. Because, by the way, tithing's changed. It's changed how it's been paid in this dispensation. It's not known if it was had in every dispensation. Or something that's specific to our dispensation, like the building of the New Jerusalem. So is that not doctrine because it's not eternal and unchanging? Or maybe the gathering of Israel, or the Lord appearing in Adam-on-Diamond. Or let me give you another one, the word of wisdom. The word of wisdom has gone through notable shifts and changes, as I'll talk about in a later video. So does that mean the word of wisdom is not doctrine because it's not eternal and unchanging? You see some of the problems with this. Sometimes people want to just call those policies. Well, those are just church policies. And while that can be beneficial, the problem with that is if you stood up and said tithing or the word of wisdom is not part of our church's doctrine, you wouldn't get in trouble for teaching false policy. You'd get in trouble or be questioned for teaching false doctrine. What I like to use is the definition of, is it an authorized teaching of the church? Is it something that the church would stand behind as one of their official statements? And that is, by the way, how the word doctrine was used in Scripture. When people, after Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount, it says they were astonished at his doctrine. And he covered a wide variety of things, from eternal truths, but also to behaviors and policies. Even in our own church history, we have the book Doctrine and Covenants. Where did that title come from? Well, the original title of the book was the Book of Commandments. But then in 1835, for the 1835 publication, they added these lectures on faith. And the lectures on faith weren't revelatory. They were not, Thus saith the Lord from Joseph Smith. Scholarship has shown that Sidney Rigdon was likely the author of much of the lectures on faith. And so the church added these great theological lectures into the book. So now their question was, well, what do we call it? They're not all Book of Commandments, so they said, let's change the title and let's call it Doctrine and Covenants. Part 1, the Doctrine, was the lectures on faith. Part 2 was Covenants and Commandments of the Lord, Joseph's revelations. So from the very beginning, even something like the lectures on faith, if you look at the original 1835, it says, on the doctrine of the church. Now, these were not always timeless, eternal, and changing truths that were in there, but they're using it more in the term of the doctrine means a teaching to be had.